Hello.
Hey, Greg. How are you doing?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm in a very fancy new apartment here in Nairobi because I have had no power in my house for the whole day. So I have a friend lent me a barely used, gorgeous apartment. So I'm excited. I have like this pine tree backdrop, I get
Very.
to leave my usual. So we have intervention 4. This is almost over, which is so weird, and it flew by. And then next week we have If It Ain't Broke, Dismantle It. We have real decolonizers in there, not the MTL Collective. And today we have Sophia, Azeb, and Tony Alessandrini joining us soon to decolonize the curriculum, the syllabus, the university, all that jazz, and diversity and multiculturalism. But we should do a quick recap. And then I know that you, Greg, have been really ticked off about stuff happening in La France. So we can talk a little bit about that before bringing our guests. All right, so let's do a little recap. Last week we had Decolonized Journalism with Suchitra Vijayan and Pervez Bukhari, and they were absolutely fantastic. Varia is in the back there. If you could play us the recap.
Newspapers, editors, governments, politicians, political parties have always done the same thing. They have tried to obfuscate things and they've tried to mislead people.
Journalism began with an imperial project, and what we now understand and think of as journalism, the record of the newspaper of record, are all deeply linked to decolonial movements, anti-colonial movements, and the project of nationalism itself. So I think that is something that we really have to keep in mind.
There's been some really serious unraveling in the sense that the states and the governments are doing what they want to do very brazenly and in a very declared manner, So that has actually, in my sense, I am a perpetual optimist. I think that has created a new space for journalism.
Yeah.
Well, optimism. That's good.
From Kashmir.
Yeah. That was actually good, right? I thought really good message.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the idea that journalism is an imperial project, a nationalist project, a settler colonial project was something Suchitra emphasized many times, though we were surprised. I was surprised when he talked about the optimism around digital media, social media, and he thinks that governments are so brazenly doing what they want to do that this social media becomes kind of a good counter. I don't know. Is that what you got out of it? Because I thought that was something that surprised me.
I mean, I found that he meant to say there's a place to occupy in more mainstream journalism as well. I mean, that is where he's worked, right? But I think he did say there's something about citizen journalism that does open up spaces when it might seem that a lot of spaces are closing. So yeah, I was pleasantly surprised, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so let's so we've been having our fake revolution, fake politics segment here. I don't think it's so fake today, but I thought we could think a little bit about the horrible events of France all of last week. And before you tell everyone what those horrible events are, I also want to say that there was this incredible, massive protest where about undocumented workers, and of course that didn't get a lot of coverage because unfortunately these other ridiculous yet terrifying things took over. So you can tell us.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it links to some extent to our discussion on journalism as well. So last week, a French teacher was horribly murdered by a man who killed him, and he declared this online. He was shot dead by the police, but he declared online that he was punishing this teacher for teaching about the Charlie Hebdo caricatures, in a lesson that the teacher has been doing for several years, where he speaks of caricature period, right? I mean, it seems, there's been a lot of information about this. It's a horrible event, but, what followed, I guess at this point, is very expected. Every politician that France has started looking for culprits and politicians and pundits, right? And so, the French news for the past 5 years or so have been overrun by fascists. Members of the National Front. I mean, it's just true. They're on TV all the time. Éric Zemmour, and the bile they spew is pretty shocking, right? And so you have people like Pascal Bruckner accusing Rokhaya Diallo on TV to be responsible for this murder, and so on and so forth, right? The first target they look for is critical race theory, teachers, and also people who write about about multiculturalism and other things, right? So this has been the mood for the most part, and it's also led to one of the most, I don't even know how to qualify this, but the Minister of the Interior was on TV discussing, again, the origins, like how did we get there? And part of his argument was that it starts with ethnic food aisles in supermarkets. That's what he came on TV to say. And, in case everybody's wondering, this was just a slip of the tongue. He talked about this for a good 5 minutes, explaining that to him, this was where it all started. When you go to the supermarket and there's a halal aisle or, kosher aisle, and, he thinks that's really a terrible thing for food, right?
Varia, do you have a picture of the headlines? Because they were pretty crazy. French minister shocked over halal supermarket aisles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, this is the problem. Communitarianism, or communalism, as we say in Indian English, I guess.
It starts with your meat. These are really terrible circumstances to say things this stupid. What's interesting, you were mentioning how certain stories get to crush other stories. One story that is not really making the rounds yet, but that has been broken by Mediapart, which is one of the decent media organizations in France, is that they've shown that the people responsible for the killing of this teacher were very close to French fascist circles. This was the case of the Charlie Hebdo killers as well. This was the case of the person who went into the kosher grocery store and killed all those people in 2015 as well. Their weapons were provided to them by French anti-Semite, fascists. But interestingly enough, now those guys, I guess, they're the ones giving you the news on TV. So I guess now we're talking about food aisles and super.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it makes me, remember we tried to do a food episode, but we didn't kind of end up lining up the right people. Maybe we'll do a second season and have a food episode. But it's just such an easy site to kind of immediately be violent, and France, of course, there was the whole debate also in the past about pork at schools, the ban or no ban. So it's historically been a line. And I remember in Italy, there was a town where they banned kebabs because that's not Italian food. So it's a constant thing. I do think it's more of a European, there's something decisively European about it. I mean, we don't have time to unpack that today, but somehow it's a type of, repelling of diversity that they do that is very special, whereas the Americans brand it, sell it, corporatize it. But then in Europe, they do something different around it, which is, I'm shocked. I'm not as used to it, perhaps, but it's intense. Should we move on? What do you think?
Let's move on.
Was there pushback, though, to this halal stuff or no? Or people are just picking it up as if that's like okay to talk?
No, I think,
okay to say this?
I think it's been roundly mocked as far as I can tell because it's so outlandish. Okay. But like everything else, I'm going to guess it's only a matter of time till people take it somewhat seriously and start discussing it as a serious idea, which, it's all the more grotesque, of course, that, again, the killings of 2015, at least one of them took place in a kosher grocery store. There's a reason, I don't know. It's so stupid. It seems beyond discussion, but this is the Minister of the Interior we're talking about. So
Yeah, I saw the one good response, which is that they're going to have to ban also Easter eggs and like the Christmas cakes. So, it's like, yeah, that's religious food too. All right. Let's move on to our extra fabulous guests, Sophia, Azeb, and Tony. We put together a little clips of them. So, Varia, you can play them.
Running out the door of the old gas station. He makes it to the pump and say, don't ask no question. Quick, get into the car, we're heading for redemption. I want you to see how nice the springtime can be. He slams the door through the gum on the floor. Jump in the seat, sweat pouring down his face. Can't stay in place, that's how they begin.
These two, they like Palestine. Did you get a hint of a little Palestine love fest there? Oh my gosh! Greg, do you want to read a bit of Sophia's achievements, and then I'll read Tony's.
All right, Sophia Azeb is assistant professor of Black Studies in the Department of English at the University of Chicago. Our book in progress is tentatively entitled, right? Another Country, Constellations of Blackness in Afro-Arab Cultural Expression. She is currently engaged in the campaign to disband the UCPD, University of Chicago Police Department, as part of the More Than Diversity Collective demands in solidarity with students and organizers. And we'll say a little more about that in just a minute.
Yeah, and hi, Sophia. Thank you. I know you're having some issues today with the storm in Chicago and logistics. So anyway, so both Sophia and I are having logistical issues to do with electricity. So at some point, it might just be Tony and Greg. So everyone's been warned. So Tony Anthony Alessandrini is a professor of English at Kingsborough Community College at the City University of New York, and is on the faculty of the MA program in Middle Eastern Studies at the Graduate Center of CUNY as well. He is the author of a book that I absolutely love and have written about. It's called France Fanon and the Future of Cultural Politics, Finding Something Different. He's also the editor of a collection of essays, France Fanon, Critical Perspectives, and he's the co-editor of Resistance Everywhere, the Gezi Protests, and Dissident Visions of Turkey. He co-edits the Jadaliya e-zine, and we're so excited to have him here. Thank you, Tony.
So good to be here. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Greg, do you want to start a bit with Sophia and...
Yeah, so I mean, at the end of the video there, we saw a post, sort of talked about the hashtag More Than Diversity movement Sophia has been part of. And I just want to read quickly, from one of their declarations, what they were asking for. So they demanded that the provost fund an academic unit at the University of Chicago that would be devoted to the study of race. And I quote, "By creating an academic unit devoted to the study of race, we will ensure that this critical area of inquiry is institutionalized as a central component of the university's liberal arts education and graduate training." There's been other, demands and decisions related to this. And I thought, Sophia, maybe you could tell us more about it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having us today. So the More Than Diversity campaign, I'll speak of just as an individual. It is a collective of faculty affiliates of the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture at the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago has never had a department devoted to ethnic studies, Black studies, Asian Am studies, Latinx studies, which is quite striking, especially because it is located in the south side of Chicago and causes, sorry, my cat is now part of the conversation, and the university has caused, irreparable damage to the South Side of Chicago and its majority Black residents. So among our demands, among the founding of a critical race studies department, we also demand faculty governance of diversity and inclusion initiatives. Personally, I'm skeptical about that concept, but that's part of the larger campaign. Increased support and autonomy for the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. And crucially, I think also we're uplifting and trying to work with student and community organizations who have long been calling for the disclosure of all funding that is allocated to the University of Chicago Police Department, because we do not have access to that information. And we want to work towards the eventual disbanding of the University of Chicago Police Department. The University of Chicago Police Department exercises an enormous amount of power and has an incredibly large area in which they operate that extends way past the boundaries of the university. So they are effectively a private police force, one of the largest private police forces in the nation, that operates with relative impunity, really. I mean, it's a private police force in the South Side, on the South Side of Chicago. So residents of the city of the South Side are subject to a lot of policing, not only from the UCPD, but also the CPD. And an economist here at the University of Chicago, Damon Jones, recently analyzed some of the field data that the UCPD has released publicly. There's very little public information on them, but we have some of it. And so from the UCPD's own data, Professor Jones found that 73% of targets in traffic stops are Black, and 94% of those targeted in non-traffic stops in the area in which the UCPD operates are Black. That's compared to 5% of the enrolled students at the University of Chicago who are Black. So, and, they're cited for loitering, right? Standing near a bike rack, walking through the campus, things that if you are on, working in a residential college, right, this based in the South Side of Chicago, residents are going to be and must be part of these institutions, and these institutions should serve them, not the other way around. So the UCPD campaign is one that I'm particularly active in, and I think that that's kind of occupied a lot of my time and thinking lately.
That's amazing. There's a lot to unpack, I think, and we will do our best to do that. I just want to bring Tony in to talk a little bit about the ethnic studies and the diversity initiatives and so on. So Tony is writing, is still in the process of writing a book for the Decolonize That series. It's called Decolonize Multiculturalism. Which is a kind of a resounding call, for asking us to rethink diversity today, and also to kind of rehistoricize it, because the kind of radical histories of diversity and multiculturalism and the fights on campus have gotten lost along the way. Tony, do you think Chicago and all the things that Sophia mentions, they're getting something right? What are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, I mean, thanks first of all. I mean, thanks Sophia and thanks to everybody at UC who are doing, especially the Cops Off Campus work, which is super inspiring, I think, for those of us doing that work elsewhere. Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I'm really happy to be part of this conversation is to hear more about what's happening in Chicago, and particularly to hear more about how that's kind of connecting to the ongoing, I'm not even going to call them protests, kind of popular uprisings against police violence that have been going on in the States over the past few months and in other places too. Yeah, I mean, I'm super interested. I mean, one of the things that struck me, I mean, as Sophia was speaking, was the kind of combination, like on the one hand, the absurdity that there's never been a Black Studies program, for example, at UC, and on the other hand, the opportunity presented by that, as compared to, for example, a place where maybe there has been a Black Studies program for 30 years, but it has been so effectively managed by the university that you can't actually do any work there that many people in the field of Black Studies would consider to be Black Studies work, right? So I mean,
what are you referring to when you say that? This kind? I didn't know. I mean, It's okay. Carry on. Sorry.
No, but in other words, this is maybe another way of answering your sort of talking about the argument of the book in like one sentence, which is thinking about institutional multiculturalism or diversity initiatives as they exist, on the one hand, as being produced by actual radical social movements, right, in the 60s and 70s, particularly student movements. And on the other hand, the institutions themselves were created precisely to manage those movements, right, to sort of actually de-radicalize them. Roderick Ferguson, in his book We Demand, does a really nice job of sort of talking about the 1970s. And this is also where policing comes in, sort of post-Kent State, post-Jackson State, a moment when students were being like literally shot and killed on campus. The two moves were to sort of increase institutional diversity. So sort of use diversity as a keyword, as a code word, right, as part of a management technique. And on the other hand, and this was something I did not know until I started doing this research, it was really only in the early 70s that the idea of even having a campus police forces even was imaginable, right? And most campuses before 1970 did not have campus police forces. And, going from there to where we are now, 50 years later, the level of policing on campuses. So this notion that, diversity and literal violence against students, against members of the community who these diversity programs are supposedly serving, right? I mean, the way those things have come together. So just to say, UC almost seems like, I'm not going to call it a blank slate, but there's a way in which, right? I mean, the fact that's it's interesting to me what's going to happen in that context. CUNY is a different context, I think, where we were talking about this before the broadcast, like CUNY presents itself as diversity university, right? So it's more a matter here of like taking that back, right, from the managerial position.
Yeah. I mean, I was just saying what you were referring to. My first day in CUNY for the graduate school, they said this is diversity university, and and then over time, as we continued to be part of programs to learn to teach and things like that, it was always about how to manage that diversity, how to deal with this kind of the kind of immediate disruptive element that the diversity presented in a way. But Tony, very quickly, why multiculturalism? Your book is titled Decolonize Multiculturalism. I have argued that it's sexier to call it decolonize diversity. Tell me why, what does multiculturalism do? That diversity.
The one sentence answer that I've attempted to sort of come up with in the book is like, and because I think one contains the other, right? I mean, there's a way in which, in the institutional context, I think administrators use them almost interchangeably, right? I mean, the management language. But I mean, for me, like, if we think of this as the de-radicalization, the sort of de-radicalizing of radical movements for change, diversity is what becomes of anti-racism, and multiculturalism is what becomes of internationalism. Let's sort of like that would be the crude version of the answer. And insofar as one of the things I think that was key to these movements of the 60s and 70s, and one of the reasons I think why groups like the Black Panthers and student groups around, who were fighting for ethnic and race studies on campus were so violently repressed, was that they were attempting to create a kind of internationalist politics, right? Internationalist politics around race in the US. And I think that has everything to do with the violence of the repression of these movements. And it has everything to do, I think, with one of the things that's so hopeful about the movements that are rising up now.
Yeah, I think related to this, there are interesting dynamics. As you were saying, it seems the model for much of this is what happened in the late 60s and early 70s, right? I mean, when, as you were saying, like those first programs and departments were sort of, imposed onto institutions by student uprisings and student movements, only to, be eventually institutionalized. And it seems in many ways that there's a aspects about this moment that echo this, right? As you said, there's a general, uprising around the country. The demonstrations, and seems we're in a similar moment, and yet, right, also circumstances that are so different. And there's something about, again, that internationalist dynamic and the local that's very interesting, right? I mean, depending, you both are at urban campuses. I mean, you're in the middle of communities that the schools engage with or doesn't, as you were pointing out. But those issues also play out you say theoretically they play out the same anywhere you are, but then location really matters, right? Like state schools are lost in the middle of nowhere. Obviously, will have a very different relation to their immediate surroundings. I'm just curious, like how much you see this. Maybe I don't want to say interfering, but like how that becomes part of what may still be a movement with international references, for example. That's for Sophia and Tony as well. I'm just how that plays out at Chicago specifically, but also maybe more generally.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. That's really actually an important point. So I guess to sort of start by building off of Tony's thoughts, which I appreciate, I really like Nick Mitchell's definition of diversity from the Keywords in African American Studies text from NYU Press, where Nick, and I'm probably badly paraphrasing, but Nick, writes that diversity is often the promise that difference, properly conditioned, either will make no difference, or better yet, will transform difference into an asset primed for accumulation, right? And this is very much the university's approach, I think, pretty anywhere we are, to how it conceives of diversity. And I remember also a moment when I was in graduate school in the American Studies and Ethnicity Department at the University of Southern California, which is in Los Angeles, also in South LA, also had a very antagonistic relationship with the surrounding community for many of the similar reasons the University of Chicago has had and continues to have an antagonistic relationship with the surrounding community. And there was like this diversity luncheon or something for graduate students, and it was open to African, I'm using the language that they sent. So, right. African American, Latino, and I don't know, like Chicanx students, maybe. I think that was it. So, I tweeted at the university's diversity office or whatever it was called. And I'm like, why aren't Asian American Studies students being invited to this at a major university in California? First of all, so Asian students had been rendered either so normalized or still so foreign that they were not even thought of as part of the California state public or private institutions, like quote unquote diversity quotas, right? So there's an interesting way in which the university manages also the bodies they'll stack to drive any conversation away from power, which is what diversity should be about. And towards like the optics, right? Meeting certain quotas. And so I think, I also just, when I think about the internationalism that these initiatives or organizing that we're trying to do in our institutions should address, like I will not go as far as to say that the collective I'm a part of is organizing the decolonization of the University of Chicago. We are not doing that, right? We are not asking for land back. Like we're not, we're advocating for some form of abolition, but it is not a total, it's not a total divestment. We're not asking for divestment from like Department of Defense funded projects, right? So we're not decolonizing anything. We're just trying to like manage what we can in what seems like large stakes probably to administrators, but is really small potatoes, I think, in the grander scheme of things. But when we think about programs like, or intellectual orientations rather, like Black Studies, which is what I am trained in, or ethnic studies, or Asian Am or Latinx, Indigenous studies, these programs are intended to be and were built on the presumption that they were addressing internationalist an internationalist scope, where the intellectual life of the US and the world would be reorganized, to also badly paraphrase C.L.R. James. So these were intended to be programs of disruption, right? Intellectual orientations that disrupted the intellectual life that already existed at these institutions, but they were also explicitly international, right? A lot of Black Studies programs were founded by Black, American, and African immigrant students, right? I mean, and we kind of leave the international components, I'm using the we very generically, but these sorts of, the role that international students and have played in the founding of these fields of study and these fields of inquiry is often kind of set aside because we think of these as like US-based projects. They've just taken a certain form in the US, and I think that's kind of what Tony was indicating. And so, and now we have to take them back, right? And so at the University of Chicago, like, what would it mean for us to have a Department of Critical Race Studies? I don't know, I'm not crazy about that name, but like, what would it mean for us to have an ethnic studies academic unit of some kind where we utilize all of the very internationalist concerns and research that our faculty already offer at an institution that has never had any form of ethnic studies as part of the institution itself. It is kind of a blank slate because we could do whatever we want. We're in 2020, we could form any kind of department we wanted, but we're gonna have to fight tooth and nail to make sure that it isn't just managed by the institution to, for like the trauma center at UChicago when it reopened after years and years and years of community activism, and the university did not even address the role of community activists in reopening it and took all the credit for it. So we have to make sure that that's not what happens either, and that we're do all the work, faculty of color are doing all this work while on a diversity work stoppage to start an academic unit on ethnic studies, and then the university will step in and be like, congratulations to us for this initiative.
Right. Yeah, those are all super important points. I want to come back to when I was very surprised at something Tony said right at the beginning, which is that you have these departments that languish, like Black Studies department that might be languishing, but their agendas have been entirely co-opted by whatever, the university.
Oh. So I don't know where
or admin or whatever. Okay, so that was one.
Oh.
Something's going on.
Yeah,
you're back, I think.
Am I back?
Yeah,
yes.
you are.
Okay, sorry. Here everybody just went blank for me. But anyway, so I think what I was saying was at the end of it, all four of us are in English departments. We have, that's somehow where we found our grounding, maybe not willingly, maybe inadvertently. And in a way, some of my work on the Cold War also leads me to feel skeptical about area studies, because that's something that's part of a Cold War initiative that we have now inherited, and that is now seen as progressive, interdisciplinary, radical, and all these kinds of things. But and it kind of, my argument has always been that it hollowed out English. All the people who want to do good stuff, they went into the area studies places, and then English was left with whatever it is. So in the end, we are based in that. How do Sophia and Tony feel about that space of belonging? And the reason I say that is because I often see English departments, lit departments at the forefront of this mainstream articles on decolonize the syllabus, decolonize the curriculum. And it always, Greg and I were just in a meeting which lasted for hours, and we literally had to put pins in our eyes to listen. And this was about our department's change of major, The conversations are not there, yet English is constantly put in charge of managing the syllabus, managing the curriculum. How do we navigate this? Anybody who can answer?
I'll say some things, and then I also want to speak to some things that Sophia was talking about in her response. But just Well, one, and I'll mention, I mean, Sophia and I've been fortunate enough to do a lot of different panels with, so we did have like a traveling tour where we do panels together for a while. I'll also say, like, I'm really interested. I can't wait for your book to come, because I feel like your work is on precisely that moment that I'm most interested in, like that dangerous moment of internationalism. But we did a thing at the Modern Language Association last year, like a panel at MLA, which was on, I can't remember exactly how we phrased it, but it was essentially trying to bring Black studies and studies of literatures of the Middle East together into a conversation, right? And a conversation around decolonization. And, you know, in the sort of like popular imagination of what goes on in English departments, you would think like that's a really hot topic. And 5 people came, I think, 4 people. Like there were almost as many people on the panel as right. So I mean that says a couple of things. I mean, I think that English departments were institutionally among the first to sort of realize. And I mean, I love the Nick Mitchell piece that you described. And actually, I heard you, I think, cite that piece for the first person I heard cite it. So I learned about it. I love this idea that, like, one of the things about diversity in the university is that it's productive, right? It's a profit-making mode. And I think English departments were smart to, like, in a way of like figuring out how to do that without necessarily changing the way that the field functioned, right? So I think that would be the cynical answer. I do think, I mean, I was in grad school in the 90s, and a lot of people were escaping to English departments, particularly people who wanted to study, you know, what we then called theory, including, frankly, Marxist theory, right? And a lot of the people, you know, I mean, I was in grad, I mean, I went to Rutgers, we had a great geography program, but a lot of the radical geographers would come and sit in on Bruce Robbins' spots. Like, you know, I mean, there was a way in which you could talk about certain things in English departments that you couldn't talk about in other spaces, right? And again, that may have just have to do with the fact that they were big and they had resources and you could hide out in them. So I don't know. Those are two. I mean, I have more stuff I want to say on that, but let me stop there.
Yeah. Sophia,
yeah. Well, first I'll say last year's MLA panel was also during a lot of parties.
I know. Yeah,
so.
fair.
We should have just had a party, to be honest. Our Frantz Fanon panel the year before was lit. Yeah. MLA, a conference that I never wanted to start going to, but I did start going to because I got hired into an English department. I am positioned in an English department by accident. The last 2 years I was on the job market, which is a shit show. It was a shit show already, and it's even more now. Most positions that were open to people doing work in Black cultural studies in particular, which is like, I think, my particular focus, as well as like post-colonial theory, but, you know, really explicitly on the transnational, like Black transnational imaginary and radical imagination, were in English departments, right? So clearly recently, for whatever number of reasons, English departments have been capitalizing on this sort of, I don't know what was happening, that they started looking for so many people teaching Black literature and Black theory and what have you. But, you know, I got very lucky, right time, right place, and got hired as part of a cluster of hires in Black literature. I think that's how the department advertised the job, but I don't really work with literature, so it's kind of fun to be here. And so I don't know anything about the discipline of English. I was never trained in it. I think I took one English class in undergrad at the State University of New York at Buffalo, where I was also a Black Studies major. So I'm in a crash course since getting to Chicago in what the hell English is. I don't really understand it still. I do know that at the very least, like the department I am a part of is very unusual and quite supportive of the fact that I don't do literature, right? I don't do lit studies. But I will say that I have a very different perspective on, I mean, I feel like we're using maybe mean different things by area studies, because, you know, Black studies, Indigenous studies were not Cold War projects, right? But American studies certainly was. And American studies had, alongside English, I think they had like that transnational turn around the same period. And many American studies departments were originally and still are comprised largely of like people who are trained in English or history. And now we have the kind of critical mass of faculty, right? Junior faculty and some senior faculty who have PhDs in various ethnic studies fields and are on, you know, trying to get jobs in ethnic studies departments that don't exist, right? Because of the crippling of these departments and the managing of them that Tony was talking about. Some still are hiring, and that's great. But it's just, we know that the job market, that diversity hires are not anything to rely on, and don't accomplish anything except for bringing more bodies into the university for the purpose of optics, and who will probably not be retained, right? So I have absolutely no doubt that of the 4 people I'm one of 4 people hired in my department at the same time. I'm pretty sure if any of us don't get tenure, it will definitely be me. But, you know, we don't have numbers on this. Like, there's so few faculty of color, and particularly Black women faculty, who have been tenured in the humanities. They're usually hired tenured already. And so we don't know what that's going to look like. And so retention is the immediate limit of diversity initiatives that call for hiring. And also recruiting. My department is, this year, we decided unanimously to admit graduate students working in and with Black studies. But we also have the challenge of explaining and making sure these students understand how hostile this institution can be to not only Black students, but also, right, Black studies. So what does it mean to recruit graduate students working in an area where they have at least faculty support, because there are a critical mass of us trained in Black studies in the department, but beyond the English department, I don't really know what they're going to have access to. And that's going to be something these students will have to decide. But for now, right, we're just trying to get these grad students in here to get a PhD in a field that has no jobs, you know, to specialize in a subfield that has been steadily disinvested in by institutions over the last 20 years. And the most we can really offer is like a guaranteed income for 6 years, right? At a university that won't recognize the Graduate Student Union, but still, it's a job. And I think that's literally the most like diversity initiative thing we can manage right now.
And if I may, like, this is where, and I mean, I think that description of the situation is exactly right. I mean, like, we should also just say the university is broken beyond repair. I mean, in terms of, you know, sort of labor exploitation, in terms of just the sheer violence it commits on community, like, it's done, right? So, I mean, in some ways, there's a disciplinary conversation to be had. In some ways, and again, trying to be dialectical, not just trying to be like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, but trying to be sort of dialectical about it. I do think there are a lot of people who are interested in a political sense in the question of the political imagination and how to develop new kinds of political imaginaries. I think a lot of the people in Sophia you're describing, or who I encounter, who are sort of coming, you know, who wind up either in literature departments or in departments, you know, like the new versions of area studies, right, that have been sort of fought for. It's because they really want to think about the way that cultural work can be politically transformative. Right. And that really always has been a part of decolonization movements. I think the question now is like, can we do that work in universities, period? Right. And I mean, as someone who is like 1.5 feet already sort of out, sort of like looking at the door very closely, I think that's another question we could sort of put on the table, is like, what comes after the university, you know, to actually live up to what I think scholars who are currently based in the university want to create. Which is not to say that things that like what's happening at UC aren't worth fighting for in the meantime. Right. I think it's about trying to keep an eye on like multiple fronts.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the obvious paradoxes we all face, right? I mean, we work and live in what are essentially bubbles, and they can be in the middle of a city or in the middle of nowhere, but they've been designed that way. They're also, economically elitist, right? Undeniably. I mean, you can go in debt, or maybe you have the money to begin with, but not everybody can afford setting foot in those places. But we're interested in dealing in this case, particularly with, very, radical politics. And there's something deeply, paradoxical about this, right? I mean, we're teaching people who, not to generalize, but the great majority of them are likely to come from and remain in the elites of this country. But much of what we talk about is changing things for the majority, right? So, I feel like, with, both of you, I feel like a lot of the relevance of those ideas, and I think, Tony, that's what you were alluding to, and I feel like that this is a big part of the demands in the movement in Chicago, is to open up on the city, right? I mean, that's right outside the door. But as you say, it's also institutionally something our schools have, especially in the past 40 years, have increasingly tried not to do. And so, I've seen some of the questions are along those lines, right? I'm not asking you for a final answer, but I'm just curious, how much you see this, maybe bearing on your work and also on your activism, I guess. Tony, you started talking about it, but because I know you guys, you work not just, we mentioned locally earlier, but you also have you're involved in different kinds of movements, both locally and internationally. And I'm just curious if you see this again, how do you see this working with what you do, strictly speaking, at the university, maybe?
Do you want to start?
I guess I'll say something that makes me really, really happy. Is so it did not a lot of formal organizations for disbanding the police or divestment from policing on college campuses did come together very quickly this year in response to what is a popular global uprising, right? Led by Black people, not just in the US. But a lot of campaigns had started really quietly many years earlier. And I'm really proud here at the university, our faculty collective call for the More Than Diversity campaign to disclose University of Chicago police funding, as well as work towards the disbandment of the UCPD. We are just following the lead that has been fought for by an amazing student group here, UC Care Not Cops, who formed in part in response to UCPD shooting, thankfully not fatally, a Black undergraduate on campus while he was experiencing a mental health crisis. And of course, the UCPD lied about this, right? So it took body cam footage to reveal that, in fact, the student was not well and needed help, not police. And Care Not Cops has been really diligent about building ties to existing community organizations on the south side of Chicago and in Chicago more broadly, such as Good Kids Mad City and many other organizations that, again, are leading this charge. So we find ourselves in these bubbles, in these little islands, whether rural or on urban campuses. But usually I have to say, if students aren't doing it first, staff are, right? Staff who live in these communities or maybe from these communities, following that kind of trail, building those ties, it takes time and it takes a lot of work, but it makes me deeply hopeful to see how much that has exploded very recently. So you have Black Students for Disarmament at Yale, the University of California and Cal State systems, Cops Off Campus campaign. These are well-organized campaigns that are, founded and led in part by students, but also are dependent on community support, community leading the sort of path and setting the terms of what needs to happen. Pardon me. And then faculty, like, you know, we're usually the last on board, but like we can participate in these ways. So I'm not like really concerned about the university surviving, because I think Tony's predictions are right on. Like, because this always was the inevitable end of like being an Afro-Arab Palestinian in the academy for me. Like there was never going to be a happy ending here. But I'm really like psyched that abolition is so much more on coming out of everyone's mouths. I'm psyched that land back, right, is coming out of people's work. I'm psyched that these ties between global Indigenous and Black communities is really being, mobilized to the top. And I guess just to like say one last thing on that, recently Northwestern University students organizing Community Not Cops, right? So another anti-campus policing campaign in response to a really gross letter by Northwestern University President Morton Shapiro, in which he said that these student protesters outside of his home calling him a pig were making an anti-Semitic remark, rather than like what we know pig all means in this context, which is police. And pigs are haram, so you know we need those halal food aisles back. In response to that, Northwestern students in Community Not Cops, specify that they are working for abolition. They are anti-race. They're explicitly anti-racist, right? They're fighting against anti-Blackness, anti-Semitism, and Zionism. And I was really, really, inspired by the fact that they are tying all of this work together, that they see this as one, ultimate, as one really collective path, right? Like, so all of us in this together, like building these relationships, not in new ways, but, in, I think, a little bit more innovative and broader ways than before.
Yeah. Can I deflect a little bit? Can I, not deflect, but change to a slightly different topic? There's two things I wanted to bring to the table. One was the ironic, tongue-in-cheek, but somewhat serious title of our episode, which is "No, it's not on the syllabus," right? So I think we should talk a little bit about this document that's now proliferating. Like there's the Lovecraft Country syllabus, there's the Beyonce syllabus, there's this syllabus, there's that syllabus. It's never ending. And let's talk about that. And then I have one other question about strategies around diversity and recent kind of problematic turns with identity politics type of issues, which I'll get to in a minute. Who wants to talk about the syllabus? Maybe Sophia has an English. She doesn't have English training to deconstruct documents. I'm just kidding.
I will say that there's no information on any of my syllabi, so my students always remind me of what I forgot every quarter.
Yeah, so you're going anti-syllabus a little bit, anti-syllabi a tiny bit, but
is that a decolonial input on your part, Sophia?
It's mostly forgetfulness, but I play it off as like we're collectively building the class together.
It works.
That works.
It works.
Sorry, Tony was saying something.
No, I was. I mean, I took sort of "it's not on the syllabus" to mean, among other things, like it's not sort of like, oh look. I mean, the chapter I'm trying to write now in the book is where I'm trying to deal with something I'm calling austerity multicultural, sort of the austerity state of multiculturalism, which is another way of saying how we deal with the sort of limitations. And I mean, as teachers, even like the true decolonizers I know who are teaching have those moments where it's like, ugh, I really need a writer from X for this class on Y. Right? Because we get to teach maybe 6 texts, maybe fewer in a semester, and we want to be inclusive. And all the things that we are able to like theoretically and politically demolish then come back to haunt us when we have to make a syllabus. And we're like, ugh, do I teach this like kind of writer or this kind, or like how do we, how to manage that? And I don't have the answer to that yet, but I think the beginning of an answer is like, the answer is not going to be the better syllabus, right? The answer is going to be, again, kind of fundamental transformations in the way we do intellectual work.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things I'm really grateful about in this conversation is I think we represent a bunch of different positions, a bunch of different like places within the current academy. And we talk about this thing called the University of the Academy, but like, as someone who teaches at most of my day job is at a public community college in Brooklyn. When I tell people that, oftentimes, like I have a joke with a friend where it's like there's a variety of reactions. Sometimes people will be like, "Oh, I'm really sorry," like as though it's like, or sometimes people will be like, "Oh, thank you," like "Thank you for your service." There's a kind of like that. And I'm talking about fellow academics, right? We're on conference.
Yeah, of course.
But like, we're like, it is one educational ecosystem in a certain kind of way, right? I mean, there is a way in which all the things we're talking about like do affect, they just affect institutions unevenly, right? In the way that an abolitionist like Ruth Wilson Gilmore would talk about organized abandonment as this like uneven thing. So, I mean, one thing I keep coming back to in the conversation we're having is like, what are the fronts on which we should like spend our energy and fight, right? Like, I mean, there are days where it's worth fighting for, is it worth maybe even fighting for your syllabus? Like, no, I'm going to teach this syllabus, and there are other days where it maybe is not even worth fighting for the university.
Right.
The work I'm trying to do now is largely on kind of alternative models of community education, because my experience teaching at a community college is every force involved in the community college prevents you from doing community education. Starting from the fact that they set up Kingsborough, in the 60s, there was a fight to put a college, specifically a community college in Bedford-Stuyvesant, which for people who know Brooklyn is, largely Black, largely working class community. And instead, the politicians and administrators who put this together were like, we're going to put it in Manhattan Beach, which is a totally white, rich enclave.
Right.
In Switzerland. And so in a certain kind of way, it's like, all right, that's the hand you've been dealt if you teach at Kingsborough, right? Can you do anything with that? There are days where I'm like, what we should do is burn it to the ground and salt the ashes and then rebuild it in a place where there are actual communities.
Yeah. Can I ask? We're gonna have to start taking questions soon, but I just want to get something off my. I've been thinking about this quite a lot. I think all of us are called upon to do diversity work, which is really painful work, where you have to constantly sort of put yourself, your identity, your background, your views constantly sort of out there and so on. And I agree very much that this is very extractive labor, and it's often a lot just for optics and things like that, And so there's one end of that argument, and then the other is also the kind of argument that those are the only people who should be doing that work. Only Black, Indigenous, brown, whatever people should be the ones decolonizing, should be the ones leading this or that. And recently, a friend, was really skewered on social media. Zillions of comments because as a white person, they were seen as as a problem for a kind of decolonizing agenda, some sort of a talk, and so on. And it was sort of like, oh, this person had taken a job from a Black person or a brown person. This person is now getting all this platform to talk about decolonization. How dare they, sort of a thing. So I don't know, like, where are we with, maybe this is just a social media problem. I mean, I don't know, where are we with this particular paradox, And I'm going to zoom in on Tony, just to ask him what, because Tony is always the absolute greatest in everything Palestine, everything, Black, in everything, you're always part of that, and you have been for years and years. And how does one deal with that? What are the answers? How do we include while claiming that space in a certain way,
Wow. No, I'm absorbing, okay. So I don't pretend to have an answer, and I would love to hear what everybody thinks of this, because I mean, it's like, it's not, one thing to say is like, it's not the problem of white people, it's the problem of whiteness, right? Sort of whiteness as an institutional force, as a political, which is not to say it's not also the problem of white people. It is definitely the problem of white people. But I mean, the problem behind the problem, this is why I love James Baldwin's, notion, like people who think they are white, right? I mean, like the extent to which, right, like that whiteness is something that you're invested in. But like my very short answer, like I very much deeply honor the place where this notion of like allyship comes from, right? Because I think it's a way of really resisting this kind of easy like, oh, look at me, I showed up to the protest, I showed up to the meeting, like I'm down, right? I mean, it's sort of it's a way of, I think, pushing and also of acknowledging the fact that people could come to the same struggle histories, right? Different experiences of that struggle. That said, I think it's a symptom of the fact that the notion of solidarity has been so degraded, right? And again, I think social media bears, I feel vexed about social media, but I mean, it bears some responsibility. It's sort of like what I tweeted about it, right? Like, it's like I have the t-shirt and, I mean, I think reclaiming that notion of solidarity, and the thing about solidarity as I understand it, or have tried to, and I'm honored to be part of a group called the International Solidarity Action Research Network, so shout out to them, where like this is what we basically do. We sort of think about like what are the histories of solidarity, what are forms of solidarity, and what could it look like. But I think solidarity is about earning your way into a struggle, right? And maybe potentially too glib way to say it, and I'll be interested to hear what others think in the audience and etc., is like a friend of mine, Sloan Khalife, has just published this little book called How We Whitewash White Supremacy and How to Stop. And part of the argument she makes is that, sort of white allies, the people who want to be white allies, think it's about intention. And in fact, the only real important question is about effect. Like intention, if you're sort of there to defend your intentions, like that's utterly meaningless. If we think of decolonization as a project, right, and literally as a project of like repatriation, right, of like reclaiming, of reparation, then it's like, are you contributing to that or not? Which is why, like, everybody who's like run out to read White Fragility over the past 6 months, I want to be like, go read Black Marxism, actually. Right, like that's actually, if you sort of want a way into the conversation. I want to end there because I don't want it to become about sort of like white guilt, right? But I mean, which is an insidious and useless thing, right? The notion of white guilt.
I think I really appreciate that, Tony. And I know you think so deeply about solidarity in really complex ways. That's been very helpful for me. And I know that in your book on Frantz Fanon, and oh crap, I reviewed it and I forgot the full title. Frantz Fanon and the Future of Cultural Politics. Yes, all right.
Like two of the few people in the world who have read that book are on this call. So.
I love that book. Well, you think so deeply through Fanon's connections with other thinkers, right, and resettle him in a Caribbean context, and like do all of these wonderful things with Fanon that have been really important for my thinking through Fanon, and I know for many others. But something that you write about in that final chapter of your book, which is in part on the Arab Spring, which I hate that term, but is that solidarity is about commitment, right? It is about total commitment. I think that point about intention versus impact or effect is really, really important. And I know, Bhakti, you had kind of phrased it in an email like, I want to, like, maybe we should ask a question about white allies or something. And I'm like, or like, what do you think about white allies? And I remember being like, I don't think about them. I really could care less, honestly. If you want to do the work with me and my community, then show up and do the work. Like, that's great. And, decolonization the goal is to change the order of the world, right? It's a program of complete disorder, in the words of Fanon. And anyone who wants to participate in that can certainly do so. But identity is not politics, but it also has a lot of material impact on our politics, right? And so I think honestly, it's a matter of doing the work and of making those commitments. And, you know, one of my professors in undergrad, Alexis DeVoe, the wonderful Alexis DeVoe, put it best once when she said, white allyship to me is you putting your body in between me and the cop who's about to bust my head. And I think it often is that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely. I mean, I agree with all of that wholeheartedly. I think my question is not what I want to do, what I think about white allies. It's sort of like, how can I, you know, when I see the person that I see doing this work and really going for it and really making valuable contributions and calls to deplatform them, calls to cancel them, you know, which puts my allyship on the line then, you know, as in whatever capacity I am in. It's just like, I felt recently left without any response. And I was just like, no, this person is perfect. Please come listen. Don't say these nasty things, you know? So that's the position I found myself in. And then I wondered, like, is there a definitive answer to just say, no, this is not how we should do things? And I think, I mean, you both have covered it, of course, you know.
I think so.
Conversation though. I mean, there's also, you know, I don't know. I mean, to go back to what Tony was saying, you know, there's always going to be, especially on the social media, there's always going to be people doing things. And as you said, you know, it's all intent, right? I mean, if we're going to go back to this, you can write things very easily, have them there, you know, for 1,000 years. You can insult people and just, you know, have it in everybody's face, you know, within seconds. But then is that going to take away what those people actually do? I don't necessarily think so, right? I mean, there's a way in which those many conversations can focus on things that are ultimately trifling. I mean, you know, it's not. I'm not saying it's pleasant, obviously, but then ultimately, who's that? You know, Johnny 123 from Facebook is maybe not. You know what I mean? It's not. Maybe there are worse things to deal with. I don't know.
I think that's pretty much, Greg, what I was thinking. I empathize, and it must feel really I mean, a lot of my Black colleagues and I were inundated with white supremacist emails over our English department initiative after Fox News and Ted Cruz and Thomas Chatterton Williams like tweeted about it, which is really sad that they're not going to apply to the department and pursue their PhD work with us. But this is just what comes with doing that work, right? And I'm not saying like buck up, like, no, obviously you get to feel all the feelings about it and feel protective of people that are doing the work that you are working with. But I think it really, you have to just, you have to let it roll off of you, because there's more important things that are happening. And hopefully that is like the reason that you're invested in these things in the first place.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think, you know, like, I don't think anybody should be in a position other than to expect to get flack from whoever on whatever. Like, that's part of solidarity. That's part of the struggle. It's like, it's going to happen. You earn your way. You know, I mean, I think the only answer is like over time. Like, ideally you earn your way. And I mean, you're never going to make Twitter happy. You're never going to make everyone on Twitter happy, but you sort of, you know, for the people who you're actually in struggle with, you know, you do the work and you prove yourself, or you know.
And it's, of course, not just from like reactionary jerks. It's often from people that you feel like you should be, you know, in like close connection with and building with. You know, a lot of folks who are trained in Black Studies took issue with our graduate admissions initiative, and rightly so, like out of concern over how an English department trains people in Black Studies, which is, by the way, like why we need a department at this institution. But because there are so many new faculty hires trained explicitly in Black Studies, it's one step on the road there. And Black Studies, of course, is not a politically coherent intellectual orientation, right? You know, skin folk and kinfolk, identity is not politics. It doesn't always mean you get it right. Or you're doing things the way that I think you should be doing them. And maybe I'm doing things wrong. So yeah, I think though, like being able to take in those critiques from your side and just like digest them and take some time out. And then, you know, obviously totally ignore the critiques that are like, you know, telling you that Black people kill more Black people or whatever the shit is in my inbox lately. I have no idea what's happening there.
I mean, the great late critic Barbara Johnson had this thing where someone asked her once about like hostile questions, and she says, one thing I've taught myself to do is to ignore the tone, and so someone says, how could you possibly say that, whatever, she's like, I force myself to go, okay, how could I possibly say that XYZ? Well, I could possibly. And I mean, I think it's the same when someone says like, why are you doing this work? Like, well, why am I doing this work? I think that's a fair question. I mean, if you take the sort of the venom, you know, the slight sting out of it, it's a totally fair question.
Yeah.
Right. Do we, I want to take a couple of questions, but before that, is there like pithy, quick advice, because we advertise this very much that we want to resist faux diversity, which, as Sophia, you would say that's not an oxymoron. All diversity is faux, you know, at the end of the day. But you know, I think there are like, I think Tony, you had shared these. You shared something that Kingsborough was sent. You have them? Can you, did you send them to Varia?
I hesitate to make people watch it. Yes, I did. Do we want to roll those? Yeah.
Varia, can we see what?
So what I mean, and the reason I chose, like, by the way, and this is like just what showed up in my inbox in the last few days. So this is literally, it could have been like anything. But I think what's striking about it is that like the people who are organizing this, and I'm actually involved myself in a kind of vague way in organizing this, are trying to do something good, which is sort of to actually dedicate a conversation to Black Lives Matter. If you go back to the first one. Or that one, yeah, that right. I mean, Black Lives Matter moving towards a collective consciousness, and then the administrative PR machine takes over, and like this is the kind of literal clip art, right, that they choose. And if you could do what you were doing, which was like flip forward. Thank you, Varia. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, here's another version, right? I mean, and they've literally pulled those from like stock images. And I mean, Kingsborough is in the middle of Brooklyn. We actually do have a hugely diverse, like, so I mean, it's almost like from the administrative viewpoint, like you can't even risk using, it's like, no, we need like there's a thing that is diversity, and we need to signal that at all times because that's our brand.
Yeah, I like the cartoon of the. Am I echoing? Yeah, sorry. No, the cartoon of the Arab student from like Bahrain or the Gulf or something, like in the full outfit. We never see that. Hey, that's a good move right there.
It's so deeply offensive. Like they look like Borat characters. It's like deeply offensive. And sorry.
No, I saw a TikTok the other day that was like a Black kid like running away from the campus photographer so they wouldn't have to be in diversity materials.
Yeah, that's the other question. Anyway, but I agree with Sophia. I don't think there is a diverse, at least an institutional diversity that is not like full diversity, frankly.
Yeah. Let's take a question. I'm going to beam it up here. Amrita Ghosh is asking. She says, brilliant conversation, yay. And I am especially interested in this notion of solidarity beyond insider and outsider politics. And outside the US academic frame, the idea of diversity is sometimes not an assumption and a large gap where I am located. There are post-colonial centers of research with Black or brown people as temporal fixtures. And all TT folks are from the homogeneous population. There is great work in allyship, but what's at stake in such temporal other presences when there? Wow, this is a complicated question. Somebody who tackle it?
I don't think I have experience with that framing that. Unless the homogeneity of the tenure track population is like in regards to like their tenure trackness. But in my experience, in fact, most of my dearest friends, oh God, my cat's eating a plant again. what most of my dearest friends who are contingent workers, especially, are actually like some really wonderful white scholars trained in Black studies who have been unable for many reasons to get a tenured position. So I don't know that I could speak to this really.
I mean, look. One of the many problematic aspects of like institutional diversity is also this notion of the sort of the diversity hire, right? And there's a way in which certain fields, I mean, third world studies, etc., Black studies are sort of seen. I mean, I've been in department meetings at various institutions where it's like, well, we need like, okay, we need to do a diversity hire. Well, let's do a creative writer, or let's do a post-colonial, like, rather than simply saying like, we are too fucking white and we need to change that in every aspect of what we do. Right. And that's part of it. Part of it is that, like, frankly, I'm not even sure there's going to be tenure jobs very much longer. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing necessarily. Like, I think the like unspeakable, like when we talk about institutional politics, I think the two places where people's commitments really come out are their commitment around labor, right. And sort of like specifically contingent labor, and their commitments around Palestine, because those are actually the two things you can get yourself in trouble with. But I really appreciate Amrita's question. I like many questions, I don't think there's a part of me that wished it was as easy as sort of white people stepping back. But I think there are massive questions, beginning with the question of who even gets to go to grad school in the first place, who even gets to go to college in the first place. I think it really is, like fundamental changes are necessary.
I know. I remember when I got my job, and I commented like, oh, it's not the most diverse place or something, and I guess the year I was hired, like several non-white people were hired, as universities tend to do. Hi, Greg. Were you hired at the same time? But I was explicitly, somebody thought, I don't know what this person was saying to me, but they were like, you have to understand that the three of you were Asian and y'all are not, you're not diversity hires. So, you shouldn't see us. I was like, okay, it wasn't like I went around with a t-shirt being like, I'm a diversity hire. It was just there was such a resentfulness in even the questioning of that kind of thing. It's horribly complicated, especially this wanting to populate, departments with just a sort of token something or the other.
Yeah, and it devalues us, right? I've had two diversity postdocs, and I had a dean at one institution, also in a city that Tony lives in, that constantly referred to me as a diversity postdoc. And I'm like, well, it's good to know that that's literally all I am here, because I feel like I'm super valued. I also was hired like the 1 year where like all the Black faculty were on leave. So it's like, I guess you needed one person to teach like Black studies shit. And so they pulled my application out or whatever. And they're like, cool. Is she brown? Cool. But that's, it really reduces you entirely to this sort of identity, which is kind of crazy, because I could have been a total normie and like been like super liberal and like not caused any trouble, and maybe I would have had a tenure track job at that institution if I had no politics beyond what administrators saw when they looked at me. And so, it so devalues the perception that we're always diversity hires in the first place. I don't care. I don't have the ego. I don't have ego enough to care about that. But I do see how it impacts, like, especially graduate students of color, right? And undergraduates of color who are like really trying to figure out where they can do the work they want to do, and with which faculty, and are just really desperate for any kind of connection that speaks to who they are, and first gen students and low income students. I mean, there's so many layers that diversity doesn't even begin to address. And it really is about like human connection and solidarity in that way. And no amount of hiring is ever gonna correct that. I think for many of the reasons Tony pointed out too.
Yeah, and I mean, this is maybe the moment to say that, like, that in many ways, I probably was a diversity hire at the current job, because Italian Americans are actually a protected category at CUNY, which on the one hand is like obscene, but on the other hand, there is like a documented history of discrimination against African American, against Italian American. I mean, there's also a documented history of discrimination against African Americans, but you know, in the same way that there's a documented history of anti-Semitism at private colleges everywhere, all the Ivy League. So, I mean, these things exist, but I mean, what we call diversity, right? Diversity hire or whatever, it's like, no one has ever called me that. I just know I'm that because I just know that's a thing at CUNY. It also reminds me of friends who have been, you know, I'm thinking specifically Turkish academics, but increasingly academics from other places, India. I'm sure this is going to be, you know, where they'll get kind of scholar at risk jobs.
Yeah.
And you know, then they become like, I mean, I think it has something to do again with the way the institutions and inhabitants of institutions sort of see themselves. It's kind of like, aren't you fortunate that we've, you know, so rather than like, no, I'm a scholar, right? I'm a scholar who was like forced out of my country, probably because I was doing the work there. And like, you're fortunate to have me. And in fact, there's no reason I should be here. So I think it's that same kind of mentality.
Let's quickly take Sherry Zane's question, which she asked before. A short answer, because then we have Greg's music section to look forward to. I am part of a gender studies program that is discussing the possibility of merging with Africana and ethnic studies institutes. Is it possible, or are there examples of units like this that do not have a hierarchical structure, such as a council of folks as opposed to a director, etc.? Does this seem like a good idea? I don't know.
I think that I had one experience with this a very, very long time ago, and I was observing it as an undergrad. So I think if I had to go back with my current, you know, devolved brain from too many PhD classes and things, something that happened that was really in the merging of many different like smaller departments like Black studies, ethnic studies, Indigenous studies, and gender studies, is that it overwhelmingly in that scenario was proposed by the institution to rein in the autonomy of those departments, to cut staff, to rationalize, you know, cutting back faculty and certain curricular innovations. And what happened was a lot of resentment built up between faculty, who were then forced to fight for resources, right? So that can be, if it's the result of a similar sort of like austerity measure, I would say be cautious.
Wow, that's very good. I think that's very wise.
Reading, yeah, totally.
Yeah. Should we? Oh my gosh, people have to eat lunch in your part of the world, folks. Should we move to music? Decolonizing our taste in music today, Greg, again.
Great selection today. I mean, I always do.
Nice.
Anyway, okay.
I always do.
Jeez.
Let's start with something old. Let's see. You know those guys. It's not. I figured I'd keep in the topic, right? With a song about school. It's called Straight A's. The Dead Kennedys. Well, I don't know if I should introduce them, but I guess I will.
No, don't do it.
Bay Area punk rocker. They only played until '86, and then they split up, even though they've been around without their singer, touring, apparently playing old songs. He calls them a karaoke band now.
That's exactly like Arsenal now.
Oh.
They're touring without their...
And play this song. Thank
my
you very
God.
much.
You were waiting for football now.
School damage! Straight A's!
I complained that this was always too rap heavy, so I figured I'd switch it up. All right, another old thing, but it's only 20 years old, so that's like better. And we're staying with Dead Presidents, with the Dead Pres. So it started in the 90s. They met at school, at HBCU in Florida, FAMU, before coming back to New York City, put out 3 albums over a decade. Technically, they're still together, even though they haven't been really active. But so, I'm going to play this one, A School, classic about school. Can only play so much, but I highly recommend it. All right, let's keep going. More recent, slightly correlated also, but personally, because Oompa actually was in my class years ago. She's a poet, rapper, educator, representing the queer, Black, orphan, hood kids, as she says. She's been very active on the East Coast since the mid-2010s. She's from Boston. She's a renowned slam poet, and her music career has taken off in the past few years. His first song is an excerpt from her first album, entitled November 3rd, and the song itself is X Factor. So here's a little bit.
This crazy. Now you can't win and I'm the prick that shot the brick, man, why'd I do that? I wasn't finished living and I know you knew I knew that. Screaming, screw this, man, I'm through this, why'd you do this? Cause I screwed that, now you in the backfield blocking. You ain't no fool back and understand why you hate me. Well, now you're scared of dating, cause I made you step for months and what I've been avoiding facing. That thing that I've become is the monster I was afraid of, and I kept you in the dark because that's what evil had made us. And Tim was always good. I'm sure that there's work too.
Okay, she has a new album that came out last year called Cleo. Just as good. I'm gonna play this song called Thank You.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm next with mama baby. I ain't going back to school, said. You ain't gonna get no 40 acres on a mule, said. I be goddamn, I'm the homie ain't friends. Till a nigga in America that news be chasing me. I be flexing like I ain't stressed. Like ain't no depression. A black chest. And boy, you say it ain't no yes, so ain't no time clock, ain't no wage gap. I'm behind that wheel of fortune, no van and no stage. Like my niggas.
All right, I have 2 special extra bonus songs for our guests. Here's the first one. That's a young rap band from let me guess. Oh, sorry. You know them? Is that what's funny?
I really hate Arab rap music.
You can't criticize. Anyway,
I don't.
You don't like it, or you don't not like it?
Play it.
I don't hate
it.
All right, I'll just play it then.
بلا ما تفكريني بس بغني انا بغني لان الكل محتاج فن انا مش بس بنت انا بمثل الوطن انا مربوط بحب الافكار بحب مشكل شعبيه بيش وسعر وقف الغضب صوتك ضرب لكل العرب بلشت الراب بدون اي عتاب صعب وقف بعد ما فتحت الكتاب تغيير مش رح يصير بلا ثوره انا مسكت البيت عشان اضل من جواتي حره مشيت بطريق فيش له اي رجع لما صوتي يروح.
So Palestinian rap band that Sophia hates. So that was just for you, Sophia. There's another one that's really for you, though, this time. It has nothing to do with anything except that it is an ode to the Egyptian king, Mohammed Salah. And so I think they'll take us away. So, kind of a sad song. Right? Came out in 2018 before the World Cup. You know how that ended. Or some of us. Yeah. Anyway, that was it. That was my selection for the day.
Thanks.
That's the real Arab Spring.
There it is. Oh wow. Okay, there was a lot that we couldn't get into, but I think we covered a lot of ground too. Thank you so much. And then Sophia and I didn't have any electricity-related disasters. Congratulations to us. And I'm on a shaky table. Thank you so much. So next week is the MTL Collective and the fabulous Jasbir Poor. That's three of us. That's three of them instead of our usual two guests. And I think we will talk decolonizing cultural institutions. MTL Collective has been running something called Decolonize This Place, and they're incredible activists, very innovative, very interesting. And Jasbir has been, of course, at the forefront of a lot of Palestine activism. And I think we are going to have a mixed talk. We're going to decolonize museums a little bit, decolonize the art world, and we will talk a lot about engaging Palestine while being in places like New York. So come next week for If It Ain't Broke, Dismantle It. And thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Tony. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, guys.
That was
so much fun. Thank you.
Exactly.